Welcome to CinemaSpection. I'm Tim.
I'm Corinne.
I'm Bob.
Big Brother is watching, and this episode we're watching Big Brother right back as we have a double plus good conversation, using the latest newspeak, about Michael Radford's adaptation of 1984 from, 1984.
In 1949, George Orwell had a vision of the future. Today, that vision is still a best-selling novel, and his prophecy remains as terrifying as ever.
If you want a vision of the future, Winston, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
A future where freedom becomes slavery, where privacy is forbidden, the past forgotten, and where living people simply vanish. Yet one man and one woman dare to love. John Hurt, Susanna Hamilton, Cyril Cusack, and Richard Burton in the crowning role of his career. The film of the book of the year. George Orwell's 1984.
Oceania reigns supreme, and its citizens flourish under the leadership of Big Brother and the principles of Ingsoc. At least that's what the totalitarian authorities demand the populace believe. But Winston Smith has begun to feel differently. From his job in the Ministry of Truth, he's seen how reality has been shaped and people made to disappear from history at the whim of those in power. Plagued by forbidden thoughts and desires, he begins carrying on a clandestine affair with a party worker named Julia and conspires with inter-party official O'Brien, who claims to be working for the anti-government resistance. But he's about to get a painful lesson about what happens to those who oppose Big Brother. As usual, we're going to be discussing 1984 in detail, so if you haven't seen the film and wish to remain unspoiled, we recommend watching the movie before listening to the rest of this episode.
Probably a couple times.
Read the book, too. 1984 was released in the UK through 20th Century Fox on October 10th, 1984, and in the US by Atlantic Releasing on December 14th, where it opened in limited release against Dune, Starman, and the Cotton Club. Whole lot of sci-fi that winter.
Yeah.
And here's the worst part. It opened wide on March 22nd, 1985. Bit late. Against The Last Dragon, Friday the 13th Part 5, and Baby Secret of the Lost Legend. Aww.
What a weekend that was.
I know.
Wow.
That's a weekend of crazy. It was shot on a budget of £5.5 million, or $6.7 million US dollars. It made $8.7 million at the box office. What a shock that this one didn't set the box office on fire.
Yeah,
But
amazing.
it's a surprise. They sort of made their money back.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. It won Best British Film of the Year at the Evening Standard British Film Awards and the Golden Tulip at the Istanbul International Film Festival.
I'd like to know how much of that is because of the book and how much of it is for the movie, because I cannot imagine in 1984 there wasn't a better film.
I don't know.
Was there a better British film?
Yeah, that is
Because
true.
this is super British.
This is very, very British. Much more British than the original film version of this. So what's everybody's first experiences with this version of 1984?
I had been reading a bunch of dystopian literature, starting all the way back with Russian We and up until, I don't know, the 90s or so. And I just finished 1984, remembered there was a film, and watched it. I thought it was good, but it's more supplemental to the book than independent of the source material.
Bob?
Well, old chap. Sorry, I had to get my John Hurt out for I won't do it for the rest of the thing. I promise.
That's fine. Do it when you need to.
If you catch me doing John Hurt again, if I'm not quoting a line, you can stop me right there.
Hey, if I lapse into Sean Connery on the Bond ones, you have a little clearance to go.
Well, that's
John
different, though. That's Connery. That's an imitatable accent. There's no excuse to imitate John Hurt. It's just a very conventional English accent, but it sounds like you're dying. But I want to say that I have the generic experience with this movie, which is to say that I was supposed to be reading the book and I watched the movie just to kind of get myself up to speed so that I could answer the questions on the test, and it didn't help at all. But I like the movie. I think it's a good film. They don't pace them like this anymore.
No, they really don't.
Even British films are not paced like this anymore. Downton Abbey is like a Michael Bay film, to this movie. But it's an interesting way to go with an adaptation like this. 1984 is all about its message. These people aren't characters, they're archetypes, they're here to get the message across. It's super heavy-handed. Everyone is delivering a sermon, everyone is speaking to you and telling you about why this is good and why this is bad and so forth. So the decision here is basically to put all the world building in the background, infer everything, and treat them like they are characters, and really dig into them as people. And I'm not really sure that it works, but it's interesting.
I don't think they actually did that. I think they put all of the world building in the background and kept the characters at the same level, and that's why it felt so sparse.
Well, the problem is the book is so much in Winston's head, and so much of it is his thought, and there's only so much of that you can actually get on screen.
But there is a way that you can take that basic storyline and use more dialogue to get things across rather than some of the voiceover and a lot of those silences.
My first time, I actually saw the movie before I read the book. Big mistake. I saw this at the annual Boston Sci-Fi Marathon at 3 a.m.
Ow.
That's a terrible
Really
time of night for it.
Not a great time of night for it. Because, I mean, I was fine for the first half. Once Winston is being tortured, I'm struggling to stay awake. And I just remember after this movie was over, I just want to go out in the sun. Just let me go out in the sun for a little while. And, of course, it was still another 3 or 4 hours before that.
Although that may have been the intended effect.
Maybe. I mean, it's not as perfect as Invasion of the Body Snatchers at that time of night. And I think the next year after this, they put V for Vendetta in the schedule. But I remember honestly being a little bit lost, particularly when it came to Winston's job. They don't really do a lot of very clear explanation as to what he does and how he does it. You really have to watch and kind of pick up and be able to read the newspeak to figure out exactly what he's doing.
If you have not read the book, you won't know what he does. Yeah. You just have to read the book, and like I said, it's supplemental. It's like, here's a visual of this book you just read because you know the story, you know what he does. We only have to give you the barest sketch.
I'll give them credit for giving the audience credit that so much of the storytelling is done in a look. Like when he looks at one of the pictures of somebody he's going to erase and looks over and sees the guy at one of the other desks. But a lot of it is very murky, especially for a first-time viewer or somebody who's coming to the story for the first time. So let's talk a little bit about the story and the different context for it in time. Of course, the book was written by George Orwell in 1948, coming out of World War II. And looking in that context, of course, it's very much about communism and Stalinism and the horrors of that system. So many of the details we associate with the book come right out of Stalinism. Even the 2 + 2 = 5 is sort of making fun of the 5-year plan where they'd have posters saying, we got it done in 2 years and 2 years. So 2 + 2 = 5. Yay.
Every dystopian sci-fi thing is talking about its present, and usually the stuff they're talking about is gone in 5 years, or it's moved on, or it's just become normal or something, and then they usually like make the movie or write the book or whatever, you know, like a decade later, and all of the references get updated. So it's bizarre to watch this now. Like, we're 30 years on from this now at this point. So you've got a movie made in 1984 that is at once doing, okay, this book is talking about Stalinism, but the movie is keeping half the Stalinism stuff in the spoken details. The visual details is all Thatcherism, and it doesn't really click together at all because those two things think they're on opposite sides of each other. So it's got all this stuff about cultural censorship, trying to fit together with economic censorship and, you know, individualism, but not individualism. And, like, the details of it don't really fit together at all, but you kind of have to, like, click yourself back into the mindset of, okay, that's contradictory, but they're taking a shot at Thatcher, so I get what he's saying there. Okay, all right, I get you, movie. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
But that contradiction pretty much embodies the movie. It's all about doublethink. The idea that you can hold two opposite ideas in your mind at the same time equally.
Right.
I also think this is one of those cases where being specific in the storytelling makes it more universal. Because while, there are a lot of very specific references to post-war Europe and Russia, a lot of that stuff has broadened out to the fact you can apply it to anything now. Looking at it in the context of, say, the 1980s, I remember as a kid being kind of indoctrinated in this idea of Russia is evil, Russia is terrible,
Yes.
This is what Russia is like, you have no freedom. So looking at this was exactly what I thought as a kid life in the Soviet Union was.
Me too. And we grew up in the same era. We were born in the late 70s, early mid-80s. This was our reality. Cold War. Any minute now, the Russians could come down upon us.
I mean, like Red Dawn was seen as, this is going to happen someday.
Right.
Yeah. As you said, when you get to British conservatism and Thatcherism, you had like the race riots right before this, the miners' strike, Section 28 against homosexuality, all these different specific things, the video nasties, all of these sort of cultural restrictions that Thatcher was promoting.
Yeah.
And nationalism and opposition to European unity. Ooh, boy, that one hits today.
They all do to one degree or another.
Yeah, I mean, this movie, so much of it is literally about fake news.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That hurts.
it hurts a lot. But it's not necessarily just the fake news. We're calling all other news fake. It's the rewriting of history on the fly so that nobody knows what's true anymore.
I think Trump voters, that's doublethink right there. The idea that he can do something and then a couple days later say, no, I never said that. The 2-minute hate, right? That's a Trump rally right there.
Yeah.
Even as we grasp at victory, there is a cancer, an evil tumor, growing, spreading in our midst. Shout! Shout! Shout out his name!
Watching and reading about the 2-minute hate made me understand a person who goes to a Trump rally and gets worked up. It's all about this release of repressed emotions, and it's focused on one thing. And after that release of emotion, you're vulnerable to suggestion in a way. You've released something, you need to be filled up with something else, and indoctrination.
And then when it comes to the scapegoat, Emmanuel Goldstein, you look at it and the way he's made up here, clearly it's Trotsky, this Jewish intellectual who was part of the revolution and splintered away. And today you look at that and that's either Obama or Clinton. The name that they'll keep throwing out is, oh, they're evil. They've done all this terrible stuff. We must fight against them. In fact, doing the research for this, I kept finding images of these rallies and Obama's face in there instead of Big Brother. I mean...
Well, that's the thing, though, is, 1984, it's a classic of literature, and it's the blueprint for all of dystopian fiction. But in terms of, this and Brave New World, if Orwell and Huxley and all of this, their whole intent of this was to warn people, specifically talking about the Soviets at the time. This is what Stalinism is. They are taking the socialist ideals that we very much signed on with and thought were good ideals, and they're twisting them, and they're using the new techniques of psychiatry and pseudo-history, and they're twisting them, and they're using them to create this new form of politics, and you've got to be on the watch out for it, because this is going to get into everything, and it's going to completely F our ability to do everything. The warning was a complete failure. Orwell completely failed in his mission to get this out there, because what immediately happened was that the right wing seized onto 1984 and used it as a blueprint of why the Soviets are bad, and it became that thing. And now it's like a blueprint of everyone on every side of every issue accuses the other guys of being exactly like 1984. Every political party, all they have to do is cut a promo of the other guy's people sitting in a room in front of a very large picture of the other guy's person. And now it's like, oh, look, evil cult leader face, Big Brother, Hillary bad, Obama bad, Romney bad. And it's a complete failure. Complete.
Well, to be fair, I mean, that can be applied to many different pieces of popular art. I mean, for a couple of years there, everyone was pointing at Star Wars and going, they're the Empire, we're the Rebellion, yay, on both sides.
Well, it's very black or white thinking, and a lot of lit can be like that. But not to quibble too much, but you mentioned both Brave New World and 1984. But both of those have a history coming from a Russian novel called We. I can't recall the author's name offhand. I wish I'd written it down. I didn't think it would come up. But they explore a lot of the same ideas, this breaking down of society, the breakdown of family, and the eradication of creativity and curiosity. There's a lot of quibbling as to who read whose book first.
Yeah, right.
And who wrote what first, but generally it's understood that We was first, so that it's coming out of Russia, and then it's being filtered through British politics and British social ideas, but then those are getting put right back on Russia. It's very interesting.
I remember hearing that this book actually became kind of like the Emmanuel Goldstein Principles of Collectivism book when it was smuggled into Poland, and people were reading it in communist Poland and sneakingly, here, read this, it's important. It was kind of weird to see the book become the thing that it's predicting in the book. And the other big element of it is surveillance, which with the whole Facebook scandal, and that's the weird thing, is that we didn't even really need for some government to come in and put surveillance everywhere. We kind of did it ourselves.
We are the footloose town elders. The saddest thing about all of these is they seem so optimistic now. All of the dystopias seem really optimistic that you would need this whole apparatus. Like we see Minrek, and they have these big operations where there's all these really professional things, and there's so much effort being put into filtering out the fake news, and they have to be so precise in cutting them down. And, because it's going to take all this effort, because people are hard to fool, and you're going to have to work so hard to trick everyone. And no, it turns out you just have to Photoshop Obama's head onto, like, the devil and put it on Facebook, and a million idiots will all immediately believe it.
In the movie, I think that all of that cutting up and rewriting of news history has a bigger purpose in that it anesthetizes the masses. I mean, they are all drinking Victory Gin all the time. They're smoking cigarettes to the point where Winston has a chronic cough. Those are all forms of escapism without it being a dangerous escapism. So they're workaholics, they're drinking, they're smoking, but they're not really having sex unless they are violating their social norms.
Or reproducing for the good of the party.
Right. And they're not creating anything. So it's a very dry culture that is trying to repress human ideals of sexuality and creativity and curiosity, things that make a society grow beyond what it is. They don't want it to grow beyond what it is. They want to make it, they want to repress it further.
And based on the principles that O'Brien mentions about doublethink, I think a lot of the populace actually do kind of know that these news items aren't real when they're hearing them, but they know they're supposed to be real, and therefore they grab onto, yes, they're real.
Well, it's a fear, because if they don't believe this, then it's a thought crime, and if it's a thought crime, they're going to get found out and taken away.
But also, it's easier to believe the good news, that, oh, yay, the rations are going up, that, yay, we're winning the war, huzzah. It's a lot easier to hear good news than bad news.
But it's just that easy now, too. I mean, we flip on the news, and we listen, and how many times are we given a statistic without context? So it's very similar. They're being told, chocolate production has gone up 25%.
The Dow Jones is up 4 points. Yay.
Right. So they're numbers that sound positive, but what's the real meaning?
And goes back to the ridiculous figures that Stalin's government would put out about, our production is up by 200%. Yeah, and while people are starving left and right.
Yeah. The desire for inertia is never remarked upon enough when it comes to the ability to manipulate human nature. In the end, most people really do just want to be able to, get by. People will eventually accept, it's like with the boiling the frog thing. You don't boil the water all at once. The frog will jump out of the pot, but you turn the water up gradually enough, the frog will just sit there and boil to death because it's easier than jumping out of the pot.
Well, it goes to that basic self-preservation instinct, and it's just warped into a weird, rather elaborate self-delusion. Let's talk about the adaptation and the fidelity to the novel. I do appreciate that the movie is pretty close to the original book in terms of events and dialogue. Some of it is cut down, some of it's moved around, but it's still pretty close. I do think it gets the spirit of the book pretty well.
It does. There was definitely a lot of switching around of scenes and some characters saying the words that other characters would have, but for the purpose of it being a film, they needed to condense some of the characters.
In terms of what exposition they did do, I think starting it off with one of the news broadcasts, pretty good at setting up at least the basis of Oceania. After that, you do really have to watch to pick up a lot of the details.
The builders of our world, struggling, fighting, bleeding, dying. On the streets of our cities and on the far-flung battlefields, fighting against the mutilation of our hopes and dreams. Who are they? They are the dark armies. The dark, murdering armies of Eurasia.
Starting a film with a radio broadcast or a news broadcast is a really quick shorthand for films to get a lot of information across really quickly. So it's an info dump that doesn't really feel like an info dump.
Especially when you put it in the context of all these people watching and then getting emotionally involved in it a second later.
So we're not just watching this news video and experiencing this culture for the first time. We're watching how the people in this world are responding to the same stimulus.
Yeah, it's a good way to do that. This is how they receive their news. This is where technology is for them. This is what their world looks like. This is the extent of it. This is how they respond. There's a lot in there. It's a sparse world building, but it works. It's like, okay, this is their culture. This is what you're looking at.
That is one thing that struck me, that it is very sparse in terms of dialogue. There are, like you said, long stretches of silence or just watching a lot of show don't tell in bits of this movie. And it's kind of an isolating film as a result of that. When we were watching it, we didn't speak for a lot of it. And every time we'd crack a joke, it sort of felt weird.
Yeah.
I mean, our world became as small as his world. And it's really interesting to see just how small it is for him. Because even when I was reading the book, I did not have that sense of claustrophobia. There's only a moment or two in the film where I felt a kind of release from that claustrophobia, and that is, of course, when we see green, when we're seeing grass and the sky. We're outside quite frequently in the film, but it isn't until he goes to nature that you don't feel like you're just being pressed upon.
Yeah. Most of the landscapes are like just shattered buildings and rubble and destruction.
It's the dissolution of the infrastructure, because who cares about that?
The green forest scene comes as a shock. It's almost like, oh my God, forests still exist. It almost strikes me the same way as the original ending of Blade Runner did, or that scene where they drive off into the Green Valley in Brazil. It's just like, whoa.
It is the only time we see green in the film. It's very specific.
I also appreciate that in being faithful to the novel in terms of the production design, it does a lot of the world building, all of the posters and slogans that are pasted up everywhere.
The propaganda that was pretty incredible.
Even down to elements of the book that aren't in the movie. Like I noticed in the antique shop a lot of the posters for the lottery that is, of course, rigged, that the only people who win that are people who don't actually exist. But it keeps the proles going. Some interesting differences from the book, and I think part of this is for the political context. In the book, all the characters in the party call each other comrade. Of course, again, a parallel to Stalinism, and that's taken out here, and it's brother and sister instead, which almost feels like, again, if they're aiming more toward Thatcher and the right, that they're pulling back a little bit on the anti-communist vibe of the original book.
But they keep the rampant drunkenness so that it's no longer anti-communist, but it's still just enough slightly racist anti-Russian.
It's also rampant white.
Yes.
It is so white. My first impression on our news watching crowd in the first scene of the film, and I was like, oh, they're all white. They are all very, very white. And I paid attention. The entire movie is white.
We see one Asian face in one of the news broadcasts as the enemy. That's
exactly.
it. Yeah.
It's the other, and the other is the enemy.
They also added the victory salute, which threw me off because every time they did it, all I could think of was Pink Floyd The Wall. I wanted Bob Geldof with no eyebrows to show up.
No one has ever come up with like a not the Nazi salute, but the Nazi salute that doesn't look a little bit silly.
Well, that particular victory salute with the arms up over the head, I like it because it's making the V, but it's also like arms tied over your head. At least people strung up that whole idea of freedom is slavery.
But it's also that you're trying to block your own vision.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Winston Smith, which, first of all, the name, I got to wonder if that's kind of a combination of Smith, the most generic name possible, and the name of the most famous Englishman possible, Winston Churchill.
That's generally what's understood.
This idea of presenting, here's the flower of, English manhood, and look what it's been reduced to here. This guy. This is what's left.
That would be what you hire John Hurt for.
On Twitter, there was a question going around of what actor was perfectly cast in a role, and I don't know if you get more perfect than John Hurt as Winston Smith.
Yeah.
It's amazing. That kind of just broken down way he carries himself, this idea that he's always slumped over. He looks always so tired and exhausted. And John Hurt, he's like Burgess Meredith. I don't remember him young, ever. I always remember him middle-aged.
This is the youngest I remember him.
Because he was actually 5 years younger in Alien, but...
No, he wasn't.
I think he was like 44, but he looks like he could be in his mid-50s here. And it's weird because his haircut has this kind of little kid-type look to the hair, and yet he just looks like an old man.
Yeah, he has that Bowie thing where the hair stayed young and the rest of him did not.
And as a character, Smith is very reactive, which normally I think would be a problem, but it works really well here. He's very a passive character. Most things in the book happen to him rather than him going out and doing stuff.
He's our cipher, so ciphers are most always passive because if they're too proactive, they'd be too much of a character. We're supposed to realize, oh, this is me going through this society, I'm learning, and I'm experiencing it through this shadow man. And I almost feel like the movie could have given him more characterization because we don't react that well to a cardboard character in film.
Do we even get anything about his wife in this version?
No, nothing.
Okay.
We have no idea he's married.
Because I remember that was kind of an important plot
It
point.
was a big part of the book.
Especially in his attraction to Julia, the idea that his wife was totally committed to the party and a complete zealot and just didn't want sex at all, but would insist on him doing it so they could procreate for the good of the party. And I feel like in finding Julia, he found the exact opposite.
I hate purity. I hate goodness. I don't want virtue to exist anywhere. I want everyone corrupt.
Well, I ought to suit you then. I'm corrupt to the core.
Do you like doing this? I don't mean just me.
I adore it.
Yeah, that's definitely a 50s thing to an 80s thing. 50s rebellion versus 80s rebellion.
The passiveness of his character, though, I think is interesting when it comes to that idea of entrapment, that most of his transgressions are kind of thrust upon him by others, by Julia, by O'Brien to some degree. He starts off already a thought criminal. He's bought his notebook. He's keeping a diary, which is very forbidden.
He's already visited a prostitute. He's more than just a thought criminal.
But it feels like most of the big stuff they're going to get him for, he's brought into it by others, by the actions of others.
I think by this point he's spiraling out of control and would have gone eventually anyway. I think it was 3 years prior to the film starting was the first time we get to see any of his transgressions. He tells us that it was 3 years ago. So at least for 3 years he's been a criminal. And we cannot even pretend that they didn't know this.
Yeah.
So they wanted to set him up to see how deep it was going to go, just to understand, like, how much is he not one of us before they would do anything about it, because the idea is to break him. And in order to break him, they have to know him.
That brings me to Julia. What's your take on Julia as a character?
I have a hard time separating Julia from the book and Julia from the movie. They both stand for pretty much the same thing. It's youthful recklessness and optimism that's very, very easily crushed. She's the temptress because, sex, women, always the tempter.
Well, here's what I'm going to throw at you, this thing that I thought the first time I saw this, and I still think it. Julia is one of the thought police and always is for the entire story. That just like O'Brien, maybe they did get a sense that Smith is starting to spiral, so they thought, all right, let's throw the bait in front of him. The idea that out of all these people, she randomly decides she's going to send him this I love you note and go off on this tryst with him, it seems kind of strange. Unless they've already got an idea that something's up with this guy and decide, let's push her in there and see if he goes for it.
Maybe that she's gathering information because he does talk to her a lot about a lot of very different things.
And there's a really interesting visual during the first 2-minute hate where she's yelling and you realize there's a line of sight. O'Brien looks at her and then sees Smith beyond. So like there's this direct line of O'Brien, Julia, and Smith, almost like she's part of the chain that's going to lure him in.
I almost really like that theory, but I'm not 100% convinced.
The other thing I think is interesting in that last scene where he's in room 101 undergoing the torture, and suddenly Julia is right there next to O'Brien, and you think it's a hallucination. What if it isn't? What if she just crawled in the room at that particular moment to kind of push him to make his declaration? And we never see her tortured. The most we see is one of the soldiers punches her in the stomach, which could be something she's doing just for the act.
It also looked like a pulled punch, which is unfortunate for the movie, but if you want to keep going with that theory, it could have been a pulled punch just for show.
It could be, if it is. Both you and the people who made this movie are putting much more thought into Julia than I think Orwell ever did. But
I think in the book, Julia is a pretty well thought out character.
No, she's well thought out. I don't think any of them are characters in that sense. I mean, she's very similar to most other female characters in most other versions of this story. I mean, she has details to her because Orwell's not a bad writer. You give the players in your story details and inner life, and they seem like that, but she's there because something has to ignite the life within, our protagonist, who must be a male because the author is, and what is going to ignite the life and make him want to be a man but a woman, and etc., etc. So they are what they are, and it's the same with Sam Lowry, and it's the same with whatever Christian Bale's name was in Equilibrium. I'm going to pretend as though I don't have Equilibrium memorized for just a moment, but Tim knows me better, so of course I know that he's Cleric John
I was
Preston
counting the seconds for it to come up.
Okay, so, but I do think the theory makes sense. It could very well be. It's also entirely possible that she's just an informant. If she's not a thought policeman, that this is just, she is quite honest with him about the way that she's getting by. this could just very well be another way of getting by. I mean,
she is also young enough that she does not remember anything else. And I know that we're supposed to understand that Winston as well does not remember a different way of life. But it's possible that the children, when Winston was a child, had not been turned into informants. And by the time Julia, who is much younger, was born, she was raised to be an informant. So it could be that generationally there's something different going on.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, Winston talks about having more memories of the war, like an actual war, not just the televised war that we're seeing throughout the film, and his family suffering in it. And that brings us to O'Brien, the great Richard Burton, which I know there's a divided camp on whether he's a ham or a great actor. I lean toward great actor with a couple roles notwithstanding.
Why can't he be both? We look down on hams now, but there was a whole era prior to the last 40 years of the theatrical acting tradition where there was no differentiation between being a great ham and being a great actor. It was just called projecting.
Well, there's a difference been projecting in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and I'm going to go to it again, Exorcist 2, because, man, that movie's rough.
Exorcist 2, he is not acting badly, and the screenplay is letting him down in that movie. He is doing the best a human being can do with what he is given in Exorcist 2. You take that material and do a better job than you walk into the seedy motel with little Linda Blair and your brown grocery bag full of whatever that's supposed to be full of, and look at the seedy people like you're not in a priest's uniform with the pores of sweat pouring off of you. You do a better job in that scene than Richard Burton does.
Hey, I'm not going to blame him. There are some good actors in that movie, and everyone in that movie is pretty terrible. James Earl Jones is terrible in that movie.
I did not see this, did I?
Not yet.
Good,
Well,
because I just spent the last bit of this conversation trying to remember if I had seen it.
you would remember.
Oh, when she sees for the first time, I get to be here. I'm begging you to let
Deal.
me be here.
Deal.
Because we're going to be doing an Exorcist watch through.
Yeah, I mean, we've already done one. We've done 3. She has not seen 2.
Oh,
And
I'm
We'll have to make
excited.
sure to get the right version, though, with the original ending, because that is hilarious.
Oh, I am excited, and I will spit a leopard.
Okay. But getting back to O'Brien, so this was Burton's last role, and he was kind of sick by that point. He managed to stay sober for this one. It was important to him. And I think that really adds to the role. He looks like he's the counterpart to Smith.
Yeah.
That has that same weariness that maybe when we first see him, we think maybe he's tired of this system too, and he is a kindred spirit. And the fact they can sell that with no dialogue, just the way they look at each other here and there, is really effective. And then when the turn comes and we realize, oh no, he is a full-on believer, he's scary.
Well,
Yeah.
he says that they, meaning the Thought Police or Big Brother, got him years ago, and that kind of implies to me that he was in the very position that Winston was in and had been broken and rose through the ranks. And that's where that weariness comes from, that the memory of being broken and having to break people and building yourself back up. I know they said, we take you out and we blow out your brain, but they did. During the breaking process, they blew out his brain. And what they left was not the same person. So in that way, it is a death.
And the scene where he actually hands over the book, the incriminating book, I really get this vibe of reluctance from Burton. Like, he's almost trying to subtly tell him, don't take it, do not take the bait, even though he knows he has to.
Well, would you want to put in what looks like a 40 or 50 hour day on what... This is a very inefficient torture dystopia that they have here, because it doesn't look like Smith is that important of a guy, but the most important member of the Thought Police seems to be putting in a 40-hour work week on breaking this dude.
I was wondering the same thing.
I also got the sense we're seeing a lot of time condensed into a few minutes. So it could be he tortures him for an hour, he goes out, gets a coffee or victory coffee, whatever you want to call it, comes back the next day, does a little bit more.
We are left to not understand how much time has passed, even though we're supposed to think it's within a couple months.
Yeah.
It could have been a year that he was being tortured. We don't know.
Well, O'Brien is also supposed to be significantly older, right?
Yeah.
So, if Smith remembers barely whatever the bombing was, then O'Brien is probably old enough to have fought in the damn thing. The idea, at least carried off in the movie, seems to be that he's old enough to actually believe in it. That whatever this system is replacing, the movie is kind of impenetrable, which is it's meant to be. I like that it's impenetrable because we don't really have to grapple with what it is that they think they're building with this system. You know, it's like, what exactly do you think you're accomplishing here? It's like, no, O'Brien buys into it. Mm-hmm. It's enough. He very clearly thinks whatever they are doing here is worth it.
The because doesn't matter. Right. It's the how.
The power is the end to itself.
Right.
Right.
Power is inflicting pain and humiliation, otherwise you cannot be sure. Power is tearing human minds apart and putting them together again in new shapes of your own choosing. Power is not a means, it is an end. In our world, there will only be triumph and self-abasement. Everything else we shall destroy.
And we see that he knows the lies. He knows that the book was not actually written by Emanuel Goldstein. He knows probably that Goldstein doesn't exist.
Right.
I think he actually says so in the book. I'm not sure if he does in the movie. And he knows that the back and forth war between East Asia and Eurasia is a rig as well.
Right.
And it tries to instill the correct answer in Winston. There's some interesting actors who almost got the part. Originally, Sean Connery was approached.
Oh, that wouldn't have worked.
Not at all.
2 + 2 = 5, Winston. Rod Steiger, Anthony Hopkins was considered. Paul Schofield was cast, but he had to be replaced because he broke his leg while filming The Shooting Party. I actually could have pictured Schofield doing a good job, too. I don't know, he's got that stern quality that I think would have been good. But I think Burton was great. And they were worried about his drinking, of course, because he's legendary for that. But he stayed sober for the entire shoot. He, again, felt it was important, and it shows off. And I think, as a career closer, it's a good role.
I'm glad he stayed sober, but for authenticity, everybody should have been drunk all the time.
Yeah.
This is a world where they are just burying their demons with a lot of victory gin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is weird that every dystopia thing kind of knocks off 1984 in one way or another, but like the self-medicating thing kind of drifts out of it as soon as that became a real-world thing that people started doing.
Yeah, it was big in the 70s. You had it with THX 1138. There's a lot of the self-medicating there.
Yeah.
Of course, as you mentioned, Equilibrium, it's a big plot
Well,
point.
it comes back in for Equilibrium, but like as soon as that became a thing that we started doing and deciding, hey, you know what, this didn't destroy the world, it's actually kind of fun, you know, it went away as like a dystopian marker, and then as soon as we got worried about Prozac, Equilibrium came out.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm trying to remember if there's any in the 80s that really jump into the self-drugging thing as much.
No, like Blade Runner doesn't have, like people are doing drugs, but it's just another thing that says it's the future, but not that far into the future. Brazil, no one's really on serious drugs.
No, not really. No. Interesting.
I think it also depends on what you want to do in your dystopian film. If you're trying to have something like Brazil, which is kind of it's a lark. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's an amazing film, but you don't need your characters to be on drugs or dulling their senses, because the point is to overwhelm the senses. Yeah. Equilibrium, of course, we are using a drug. Blade Runner, same thing. Yeah. It's not about people, it's about replicants, and the idea are people replicants, are replicants people. But when you get to a larger society, whenever there's some oppression, there's going to be a need for self-medicating.
Brazil's probably a little more honestly cynical about human nature, at least as now, because the evil government doesn't have to try that hard in Brazil. They just nudge them a little bit. It's like, no, you don't need to drug them. You don't need to trick them. Just give them a mall. These people are idiots. They'll fold.
And the evil there is more almost obliviousness and banality. You don't feel like everyone there is out to get somebody. It's more just like, well, we got to file this paperwork, so we have to torture this guy to do it.
Right, yeah.
Getting a little off topic, but I think Brazil is more... somebody has nudged this machine into working and it doesn't know how to not work. And that, I think, is more like our society, where people will file forms because they're told to. Nobody likes doing it, but they do it. And if they don't do it, somebody else gets mad. For what reason? Nobody knows.
See, I almost see the opposite. The society in Brazil is dependent on not working at all, that nothing ever actually gets done. That
but
you file the papers.
Nothing gets done here either. Yeah. It's very reflective.
No, I agree. But like in, say, this particular environment, things do get done. Horrifying things, but they get done.
1984, there's a lot that gets done. I mean, the fact that the mini-rec department had to be there overnight for how many days or nights to rewrite the entire history of Oceania.
And keep doing it during a bombing, from what we see in the movie.
Yes.
In the cast, a couple interesting points. Roger Lloyd Pack plays the creepy waiter at the bar. And I didn't notice until this time that he almost looks kind of zombified, which made me wonder if he was a reformed thought criminal himself. The way he delivers drinks, he almost looks like he's on robotic mode. It's really creepy.
I just assume that everyone who goes to that particular cafe has been through the ringer.
Also, what did you think of their version of Big Brother?
I like it.
It's got that vaguely threatening but also sort of paternal look to him.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly what it is. It's like you are safe in the arms of Big Brother, but you also better watch your step.
Because the description of the book, my brain immediately goes to Stalin. Big mustache, black hair, and everything. This guy, he looks a little like Stacy Keach. Apparently, they held a competition to find their big brother for this. Their choice was a guy named Bob Flagg, who was a comedian and an actor who appeared in the comic The Cold Light of Day and Calendar Girls. So I wonder if people, like the year this came out, saw him on the street and were just like, BB, BB! Let's talk a little bit about the look of the movie. The director, Michael Radford, suggested he wanted it to look like a science fiction movie if it had been made in 1948. And I give him credit, that really works. It's sort of the Blade Runner thing of if you embrace sort of the look of the past, the movie becomes a little timeless.
Yes.
It doesn't date as much. And also it has that Star Wars aesthetic of the dingy future. I've seen other versions of this that are more kind of clean and almost have that creepy Nazi austere quality to it, and it doesn't work. It's much better just gross and disgusting. That cafeteria they have to eat in, I would not want to touch any bit of food.
It was a
in that
prison.
room. Yeah.
The people who are serving the food are behind a grate. It's definitely prison-like.
Everything is worn out. Everything is cracking. The only places we see that are actually kind of attractive and clean are, well, the outdoors scene and O'Brien's apartment.
Right.
It's the one time we see anything that actually looks really nicely designed and maintained. Everything is just gross.
And notably, the uniforms are blue. So they are literally blue-collar workers.
Whereas O'Brien's is black, where he's at the upper rank. Also, notice that there's very few special effects in the movie. I think I counted 2 special effects shots with a matte painting. Other than that, it's just like practical locations, like bombed out factories they found or broken down factories, an old power station, which I think was used in Brazil as well for one of the exteriors. But the rest of it is shot practically. And that also really helps keep the movie from dating.
Getting back to color just for a second.
Oh, yeah.
There's barely ever any white. What reads as white is either grayed out or it has some yellow in it, so there's nothing pure. You know, if you're to understand conventional color symbolism, blue is dominant, yellow is dominant, and then we get these splashes of red. It's like, where's this red coming from? The red around the waist of women, the purity sash. They've taken a vow of purity, which is chaste, but it's red. It's red. It is screaming sexuality, you know. And then, of course, the other bit of color that's red is the V for victory. But it's a V, and it's a red V. So that, too, it is sexuality.
And the look of the movie, originally Radford and Roger Deakins, the cinematographer, wanted to shoot it in black and white, and they weren't allowed. So they did this technique known as a bleach bypass, where usually they bleach silver out of the print to enhance the color. They didn't in this case. So it's basically like putting a black and white film over a color film. So the color is just reduced by a lot.
That explains the look, because it is a beautiful look, and I think it only works in a story like this.
Yeah.
It might only work for this movie.
Well, it's been used in like Saving Private Ryan. Minority Report actually used it quite a bit as well. It lends itself well to creepy, futuristic environments.
Yeah.
It's weird because when they did that process, they actually did it on the film prints rather than the negative, which is much more expensive. But the problem was when they released this on DVD, they went back to the original negative. So most of the DVDs of this on its original release have really saturated brown color, and it doesn't work the same.
No. You need to get the idea that the air is full of dust and it's dirty and it's unkempt.
And everyone is pale and haggard looking, which with John Hurt, that multiplies it by 10.
Yeah, this movie looks more English than England. Well, no, I'm serious. I'm not being insulting. Every English sad movie at this point is trying to tell the world that they're choking to death on Thatcherism. So they're, magnifying what is already a very gray, unpleasant people. I love them to death. They're wonderful people, but, they had to invent a new world for gray skin to describe themselves. The British pallor looks more so in this movie than it has ever looked, and it looks spectacular, and the process, because I know what a bleach bypass looks like going through it, is such a grueling thing. I always imagine, like, Roger Deakins when he finally got to look at, like, a digital color grading on a computer, being like the Italian grandmas in the sauce commercial throwing the big pot in the ocean now that they got the Prego can. Like, you're just so really, I can just push the button. I can just do this. Just really, F12 does this. This used to be a can of chemical, and now I'm just going to push the button. Look at this. Now it's blue.
What choice does he have at this point? Shooting on film is not as practical as it used to be.
This is true.
And certainly he gets results. Look at Blade Runner 2049. I was so happy he finally won his Oscar.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the music, and this is kind of a tale of two scores here. We actually watched the film with the original soundtrack that the director preferred by Dominic Muldowney, and it's good music. It's very subtle. I mean, it really doesn't draw much attention to itself
Not
other
at
than
all.
the big Oceania march.
To the point where every so often I'd think, wait, where's the music? And there may have been some, but it was subliminal.
Like a lot of the things in the movie, very sparse, very stripped back, which I think works. But of course, for the original release, because Richard Branson backed the film through Virgin, they wanted a soundtrack that would be popular. First, they wanted David Bowie, but he wanted too much money, so they went for the Eurythmics. And listening to this with the Eurythmics score, it's so bizarre.
Yeah.
It suddenly becomes very sentimental, which could almost work in a few of the scenes in the middle in a way, but it doesn't fit the mood at all.
No.
Especially when they're trying to make a #1 hit for it single with that sex crime song, which is catchy, but it does not evoke this film in any way whatsoever. They're great, but it was just a bad mix of musician and material. Radford was so upset he actually withdrew the movie from BAFTA consideration as a protest of this. Lennox insisted she had no idea that Radford did not want their stuff on the film. If she had, she wouldn't have done it. But as a result, you get some DVDs that happily have both versions of it, so you can actually choose. And supposedly, I was looking for Annie Lennox is supposed to be somewhere in there in a cameo at one of the 2-minute hates. I couldn't find her.
I'd forgotten, so I didn't look.
With her hairstyle, she'd fit right in, I think,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
I did want to take a minute to talk about artifice and how it is used so well here to the point where you don't know it's real, you don't know if it's fake. But Winston tells us that he loves the look of someone who has a full face of makeup. It's lurid, but it's a hiding. It's an artifice.
Yeah.
The paint appealed to him. And I think that's what he had said. The paint appealed to him. So he loves these things that are false, but he doesn't like the correct false things. Art is stripped away from them, and he wants art. One of the things that he has in their little hideaway is a glass paperweight that has a piece of coral inside it. And that's a fairly decorative object. You know, it's not utilitarian at all. But also, it has a piece of history frozen in it. It's a piece of history that cannot be changed.
See, I couldn't tell how much of that was artifice or how much was it the idea that it was resisting the norms of the party, that you're not supposed to wear makeup, and therefore wearing makeup is a little act of rebellion, and that it appeals to him in that sense. The same way he talks to Julie about how he doesn't want anything that's pure. He wants something that goes against the rules and the norms.
Right, but the paint is still a falseness. And the fact that he spends his day creating and recreating falseness, but he's still attracted to it. But he's only attracted to it because it's forbidden.
I'm kind of fascinated by some of the ways the movie touches on religion. There's this sense of the rhyme involving the churches and this picture of the church that we learn has been kind of perverted into one of the ministry's historical museums. And in the end, when he's being tortured, Winston keeps talking about something is going to stop them, and it sounds like he's falling short of wanting to say God or some kind of divine being, but he can't quite wrap his head around it. He can't quite verbalize that, and Big Brother is sort of what's replaced that. That's basically what they're trying to turn Big Brother into, is this all-knowing, all-powerful deity.
Right.
Any way they can do it.
Taking the oranges and lemons rhyme for a second. Oranges and Lemons is detailing different churches that were very near to certain areas. So St. Clemens was near a port or something that had oranges and lemons. But you can see through the entire rhyme, it's church after church after church, and they're different churches, but they're all the same because they are churches. I don't know necessarily if they are all Catholic or Christian, but they're probably different denominations, all kind of bundled in one package looking the same. And later on, he develops a preoccupation with under the spreading chestnut tree. It's another rhyme as we're told from Winston's point of view, but it's actually a set of variations in a musical piece. It's a musical piece that is a set of variations. Again, it's the same thing looked at from a different perspective over and over. So the churches that are all churches but not the same, and the variations that are all the same music but not the same music. It's double think.
A couple points on that. One, I love the lyric in the under the spreading chestnut tree. I sold you and you sold me. That's the ending of the movie right there.
Yes.
Winston's selling out Julia and Julia selling out Winston.
And they're in, I think it's actually
It's
called
the Chestnut Cafe.
Right? Yeah.
But also, in terms of the church rhyme, notice where we hear it. We hear it from Mr. Charrington, who turns out to be one of the thought police. The next person we hear it from is Julia, who remembers another verse, which is another reason I think she might be part of it. And I think in the book, O'Brien actually finishes it.
He does.
So,
and he actually does in this.
Does he? I couldn't remember.
Charrington is the voice we hear right before Winston is arrested.
Right. Yeah.
And he says, "Here comes the chopper to chop off your head." So he does complete the rhyme.
But I kind of tie that with the thought police, that each of these people is feeding him a piece of the rhyme to keep him interested. And I can't hear that and not think of that scene in The Wicker Man with the swords.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, basically.
One other thing in the church thing, I love the detail that this print of this church that starts the rhyme is exactly where the telescreen is hidden. Again, this idea of that there is religion, that there's something else beyond Big Brother. Nope, no, there isn't.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, well, here's a church, and it's the only piece of art we really see that isn't propaganda. So it itself is a transgression, but it's really just hiding Big Brother behind it.
All right, here's another question I had. The very last scene where Winston is in the bar, and in the book, it's him admitting his love for Big Brother. I thought it was interesting that when he says it, he's not looking at the screen, he's looking, we presume, at the door where Julia exited. So I was always curious, is he actually saying it to Big Brother, or is he managing to say it after she's left to Julia?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know that we're meant to know. It's ambiguous here in this.
Because the use of that phrase is interesting. Julia keeps saying it to him. I've noticed that he never really says it back to her until he's being... The closest he comes is when he's in room 101 and he's saying it apparently to O'Brien, and then O'Brien changes into Julia.
Yeah.
But he also does say, they can't stop me from loving you. So he indirectly says it, but he never says, I love you.
Yeah.
The other question I had in that last scene is if Julia's even there at all, or if she's imaginary, if his brain is broken so much that he imagines a meeting with her. The dialogue that they have of like, oh, it was good to see you, we should do this again. It's so strange. I can almost imagine her as a hallucination.
Those are the false pleasantries. They know they're never going to see each other again. It's like, yeah, we'll get together sometime, when you know you're absolutely not going to do that. It may be that they're broken enough that that's the accepted call and answer for a conversation.
There was just something about the way that scene was shot that made me think maybe she wasn't even really there. And he's just talking to himself.
It's possible, because those drinks have been on the house for quite a while.
It calls into question which version is worse, because it seems like they're taking people away and killing them, and then they don't kill them, they just put them right back out there, and they're just busted.
But they did kill them.
Well, they killed them in a respect.
They come out different people, so the them that they went in, the them that they are going to kill has passed on, and they're left with what they are now.
Yeah. I took the implication that they let them out a little bit to parade them around as cured, and then we'll quietly take them out and shoot them down the road when they're no longer
That's a lot of work for very little return.
Well, we've seen them do a lot of ridiculous work in terms of getting Winston implicated and then getting him to confess.
That's true.
I mean, it would be much easier just to shoot him in the head, but they don't go to that degree. They really want to switch him around first. Also, they might think that it would be handy to have them out there in case somebody else tries to approach them to join the Brotherhood or something. That they might be as much of a lure as O'Brien was with the book.
Well, it's a self-perpetuating machine, seems to be the implication.
That's sort of McCarthyism idea. We can use this one to get more and get more and get more.
Yeah. So one of the interesting bits, it's some nice world building. There is a helicopter that just hovers and looks in windows, and it's another sort of spy. It's the Big Brother is watching you, which is, of course, during the Thatcher era. I think that's when all of the cameras were going up in
Yep.
Britain, creating like the nanny state of sorts. And now we have that going even further with drones that look so much like the helicopters we saw in 1984.
And I remember in the 80s, that was a big thing around like LA, that people would constantly be harassed by these helicopters patrolling everywhere. That was what inspired Dan O'Bannon to write Blue Thunder.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was so conspicuous, this idea of this helicopter just hovering right outside the window. And speaking of which, what's with the exhibitionism standing naked in front of the window for everybody to see? These are really not very clever thought criminals.
They're not, but I believe at that point they're in the proletarian section, so I think they were being reckless.
Yeah. Maybe. There is almost this fatalism of, well, we're going to get caught and we're going to die anyway. And I think they start to get careless as a result of that.
Well, that's the thing. How much is a stand-in for Orwell working out his shit? That half of it is, you know, hey, I've got points to make about communism and individualism and whatnot, and the other half is I'm a repressed, naughty English boy who never quite got his rocks off as much as he should as a young man, and you know, the fact that it's all about, you know, it's like, no, I need nasty, dirty, awful women and corruption and awfulness. It's Sovietism bound up with Catholicism and Protestantism and WASPism and the different forms of oppression stuff being rebelled against. They make sense in that way.
I almost saw it as also sort of a parody of the youth culture that figures, you know, yes, we'll be reckless and young and have sex and everything, and we'll beat the man, and of course, no, you're going to get ground under. What happened to the free love generation years later?
I don't think he's kidding, though.
I don't know. The fact that they both end up in such a horrible place makes me think that he is a bit critical of that point of view and the naivety involved in it.
One of the things we haven't discussed is the differences between party people and the proletariats.
Yeah, we don't get as much of the proletariat in the movie, unfortunately.
Not really.
We don't, but what we do get is very striking. We see a woman who is heavy, and we don't see anyone else, especially party members, who are heavy. So there's definitely a difference there. She's doing domestic work, and she is singing. She's singing, and that's the first time we have a character creating an art form.
Well, it's interesting because she's singing one of the approved prole songs.
She is.
But she's turning it into something else through her singing.
Exactly. She is able to create, and that's what's being stripped away. They even say she's probably had 10 kids. And that's another form of creation, to procreate with abandon.
I appreciate that Winston looked at her and immediately thought, she's beautiful. You know, Julia's like, well, she must be a meter wide at the hips. Like that, she's got her own beauty. That he is appreciating something beyond the narrow confines.
Yes, but I would also argue that this is an instance where there's pastoral. Yeah, I don't know how much you guys know about the pastoral era of Romanticism and Tolstoy, but generally in Romanticism as a literary era, there was a deep romanticism of the pastoral life, of the peasant's life, being out in nature, tilling fields, working on a farm. It was so romanticized. It was a way to flee the confines of the city and to go into this beautiful nature. And that's exactly what's happening here. They're running away from the city. They're going to a place that is much more green. And Winston is romanticizing the life of that woman because the future is for her.
Yeah, they even give him the line.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a word for it. They're slumming.
They are slumming.
They are.
Yeah. To bring it up to modern language, they are slumming.
I did miss the scene from the book where he goes in the bar and is interrogating this old man about the past and just can't get any answers that he likes. I really wish they had included that scene. I feel like that was kind of important to the story.
Yeah.
It illuminates so much of what Winston's seeking, but also his sort of myopia that he's not getting the answer he wants, so he starts ignoring some of the stuff this guy is saying that actually is kind of key and important about the past, just because it's not fitting in with what he wants to hear.
Well, that's because he wants to edit it. That's all he knows is rewriting and editing history. So he's going to write his own history, even if it's incorrect. In his mind, it's correct. Oh, and Room 101.
Oh, yeah.
So my idea with Room 101 is that they have broken Winston or whoever they have down to such a degree that it's time to teach him the first lesson, 101 being a basic class. And the first lesson is you want this done to someone else. You don't want it to be you, therefore you obey.
I feel like it's the same as that the fear that's in there is unique for everybody. What they want from everyone is unique to everybody. I think it's betraying whatever is most important to you, whether
absolutely.
it's a person, whether it's an idea. But I think for each person, it would have been something different that they want to hear to get them to that point.
So 101 is the first lesson.
I do feel like there was a bit missing with the rats. I don't know if they really instilled the phobia that Winston had in the book.
Honestly, when I was reading the book, somehow I missed what the origin of his fear was. Could you refresh me on that?
I'm trying to remember. I can't remember if it was from one of the other adaptations or the book that when he took that chocolate bar, he took it from his sister, ran out, and when he went back, the rats were eating his sister, his little baby sister.
I think that was from a different adaptation because I distinctly remember sister and mother were gone.
But there's that visual of them eating the mother that he has a dream of. I feel like there was something specific about the rats in the book that explained the fear a lot better. Because just having them be there in the room, yeah, they're creepy, but I don't know if they would instill the kind of fear that we see at the end of the movie.
Yeah, I feel bad that I can't help you with that.
I can't remember. It's been so long since I've read the book complete.
Pretty vital piece of information that I just don't remember.
Yeah, we're letting our English lit teachers down right here.
I know.
There are people with patches on their jacket sleeves screaming at their PCs right now.
Hey, I'm okay. This was never assigned in school.
It's the rats! How can you not remember the rats?
We did Fahrenheit 451. I'm okay.
The rats are the key!
But there's also the idea that rats are dirty, that they're in infestation, that they are a sign of a society breaking down, because if you can't keep the rats out, then you bringing in disease.
We're told at some point that Ingsoc has rodent agents. I wondered, are the rodent agents the rats that are in there? They're like official Big Brother rats, like,
Maybe.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I was very uncomfortable during the scene in the movie because those rats were fighting for real.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty hairy.
I was not okay with that.
That makes me very uncomfortable. We were still sort of in that gray zone between when the ASPCA was really cracking down and making sure people were following the rules on movie sets.
If there had just been one rat in that cage, I would have been okay with it.
Or if they had put a piece of glass between them at least so they couldn't actually touch each other.
Even then, it's causing distress. But it just made me very, very uncomfortable.
It was a really well-shot scene, though. The way it keeps going into tighter and tighter close-ups really gives you that claustrophobia of having that thing on your head.
And it's really the only thing like that in the movie. Everything else in the movie is they don't go overboard on the art design. They don't really go in for, here's some, hellaciously horrible looking torture contraption. Everything is basic, squared off. Like, there's not a lot of, look at this elaborate art design dystopia, because they're going for that brutalist Soviet. No, it's functional. It's there. If we wanted an art design, that would be gauche and bourgeoisie and whatnot. And then, we go in here and it's like, no, this has to be the scariest goddamn thing in the movie, so it's this nightmarish Tim Burton contraption they're going to shove on his face with a rat in it.
The mask fits over your head, leaving no exit. I press the first lever, and the rats move into the front compartment. I press the second, and the door of the cage will slide up. These starving brutes will shoot at you like bullets. Have you ever seen a rat leap through the air? They will leap onto your face and bore straight into it. Sometimes they attack the eyes first. Sometimes they burrow through the cheeks and devour it.
That's actually a torture contraption.
Yeah.
That's a real one.
And in Game of Thrones, they had the one they put in the chest and then light the rats on fire so they have nowhere to go but into your stomach.
Which is also true to history.
Or the that speech from Graveyard Shift that Brad Dourif gives about vets being fed to rats.
Do we ever see any other animals?
I don't think so.
No, I think, those are them. There's no dogs or anything. There's no...
So you could maybe see the rats as the dark side of nature, because he's been really digging, the grass and the sky.
Yeah.
And we see many shots of him just staring at the beauty of nature, and the rats could represent the horrible dark side of nature.
He mentions insects with it, but not living ones.
Yeah, I could see them as sort of a literalization of the proles. He keeps talking about the proles, they're just animals. And here he points out this idea of Winston keeps thinking the proles are going to rise up, and he's like, well, no. We can control them the same way we control these animals to do what we want and get what we want done.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question about the torture. It's weird because, all right, it looks like the rack, but it also looks like they're electroshocking him at the same time that they're stretching it. Did I read that wrong?
It did look like they were subtly stretching him, but it looked more like he was being electrocuted. And then, of course, at the end, he definitely
It's
had
full-on shock therapy, yeah.
Well, in the book, it's just a pain machine. It's just
exactly.
It's just a vague pain machine. So they're kind of splitting the difference here.
Most adaptations I've seen go for electroshock. It's just...
Well, when we finally see it from another angle, it's like a rack thing, but it's moving up and down at 2 levels as opposed to like stretching in the middle.
Well, it also stretches in the middle too, though, in that wide shot, and you can see they have what looks like electrocution apparatus in the corners. So I don't know if they were multitasking on this one. We'll get them both methods or what.
Well, I think the way Hurt was emoting, in that it was just like a paralysis, is electricity.
I couldn't tell if they actually shaved his head or just had a really good makeup job on it. I don't know. It looked pretty good. He was so caked with dirt, you couldn't see any joins if it was a makeup job.
My guess is that they actually did it because during the hair cutting scene, he was not wearing a wig.
Yeah. Shall I get to the trivia, or is there anything else anybody wants to bring up?
I'm pretty good.
All right, as noted in the little message at the end, much of the movie was shot on the locations talked about in the book and on the dates. So Smith's diary scene was actually supposedly shot on April 4th, 1984. Also, while the costumes are all kind of utilitarian, as part of his contract for accepting the role, Richard Burton insisted that his costume be made by a Savile Row tailor. So he had the only Savile Row tailored boiler suit, I think, in film history. And you can tell because his fits a bit better than everybody else's does.
If you're Richard Burton, you can do that.
Yeah. This wasn't the first version of the book. There have been a couple. There's one I watched, a BBC version with Peter Cushing as Winston Smith and Donald Pleasance popping up as Symes, and it's really good. In fact, I think as an adaptation of the book, it might take the edge over this one. They reproduce a lot more of the dialogue from the book, a lot more of the ideas. Of course, it's a TV play, so it doesn't have a huge budget, but the way they stage it in very minimalist style with really good expressionistic lighting. It's on YouTube. If you can get a chance, it's really worth seeing. And then there's the one from the 50s with Edmund O'Brien, which, talk about a really bad choice of casting.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
That one seems like it's trying to be a lot more futuristic in its look, and it just doesn't really work. It's also the one that allegedly the CIA helped finance because it was so very rabidly anti-communist in that version, and that the international version had a different ending where Winston and Julia actually died defiantly rejecting the state. Yeah, I didn't really dig that one. There's been a remake plan for 2019 with Paul Greengrass was attached to direct it. Which,
oh, God.
So, yeah, I'd be curious to see that. I think, actually, his style could work pretty well with it.
What else has he done?
The Bourne movies, Green Zone, United 93. Very kind of a cinema verite style. Well, very realistic, handheld cinema verite kind of style.
Right, but all of those are very action-oriented films, aren't they? I've never seen United 93.
Not really action-oriented as much, no.
Okay.
And,
they're pretty kinetic, though.
The kinetic, yeah, but a lot of that's just cinematography and editing. It's not necessarily a lot of people running around doing things.
Okay.
But I'd be curious to see that. Of course, this was a big inspiration on Ridley Scott's infamous Apple ad for 1984.
I wouldn't call it inspiration. It basically used that first shot. It wasn't an inspiration more than it was I'm evoking 1984 right here.
Alrighty, so what's everybody's favorite scene?
Why are you asking me? It's the coffee scene. Okay?
Illegal coffee.
I would have fallen in love too. She brought him fresh coffee, which, they don't get coffee. They probably just get brown water and sugar and bread and jam. I'm like, yes, I love you. Let's eat this illegal food and drink this illegal coffee. I'm down.
What is it?
Real sugar. Not saccharin. And I got a loaf of bread, proper white bread. And jam. A real tin of milk. Look.
That was my favorite scene.
Bob?
I don't know if I have a favorite scene from this. It's because it implies liking any part of this, and it's just and it's just not that, because I think it's a really good movie, but it's also one of those things I was like, yep, that's the once a decade I care to watch 1984. Yeah.
It's a tough watch. It's effective, but it's a tough watch.
Well, it's good because it's not meant to be a pleasant read. I mean, this is really one of those impossible to film things because it's you always have like, artists trying to make sort of entertainment out of books written by people, like Orwell, more interested in history and language and things like Orwell wasn't trying to entertain. He was trying to teach and instruct and whatnot. And this is trying to get into it's about what they're feeling and the loss of the art and culture in their society. No, it's really not. But when you look at the alternate version with the Eurythmics song in it, I don't like the alternate soundtrack, but I understand why they put it on there, because they're trying to make a version of this that someone might conceivably choose to watch. Whereas I acknowledge this is a good movie. If this is ever on TV, I cannot change the channel fast enough. It's not pleasant to look at. It's not pleasant to listen to. Even like the saving grace to watchability that can be in other unpleasant to watch good things could be like, oh, good nudity. Oh, God, naked William Hurt. Oh, God, no. Oh, God, no. Why are his hands bigger than his head? Oh, God. Oh, God. And it's
there's
just
coffee.
Yes, there is. But you see that. So
All right, now I have an image of somebody pouring coffee on naked William Hurt.
No, that's not nice.
God, Tim, no.
You don't abuse the coffee like that.
Poor William Hurt.
Oh, you awful. You're an awful.
Wherever you
man.
are, William Hurt, we apologize. Or William Hurt, John Hurt. We apologize.
We apologize to William
Hurt as
too.
well.
Oh God, did I say William Hurt?
I think
times?
I said William Hurt.
Okay, well,
John Hurt. Yeah.
I like William Hurt as well, but we're talking about John Hurt. So yeah, but no, it's like the opening is really great, and the first time they open the door into not Teletubby Land is, I'm sorry, I can't see the fake dreamlike rolling English hills and not think of that. That's just what that looks like now.
See, if the Teletubbies showed up, he would have turned on Julie in a second. No, make her watch it. Don't do it to me. Make her watch it.
No, so that's good. But no, the comedy, that's a very sweet moment, and it works. It plays. It's there. But yeah, I think I'm good for another 10 years on this version of 1984.
For me, I don't know. I know it's got to be a scene with Burton, because he's just incredible. It actually might be the first meeting in his apartment office there.
Yeah.
Just because even though he's mostly sitting for the scene, he just commands the scene with how he very quietly lays out this possible myth of the Brotherhood.
They are not an organization in the sense we know. Nothing holds it together but an idea. There is no possibility of change in their lifetime. In the face of the thought police, they cannot act collectively. Individually, they cheat, forge, blackmail, corrupt children, spread disease and prostitution in the name of spreading knowledge from generation to generation, until in 1,000 years.
In the book, I remember he kind of quizzes them and gives them this whole pitch for joining the Brotherhood. Are you willing to do this? Are you willing to do that? And if you watch in the movie, he doesn't do that. It's very careful. Like, he's talking about, do you believe the Brotherhood exists? They do this and this and this, and oh, here's this book, bye. He never actually says anything to implicate himself.
Exactly, and that's where I think the film does improve upon the story. I'm much more interested in a thought police person.
Thought cop?
Yes, thought cop. Who is willing to entrap someone without implicating himself at all. Very, very carefully. In a way that if Winston had been a totally different person, he would have been able to figure that out. He would not have even gone to his house.
And we're not sure exactly how to take what he's saying. And you can feel like Winston isn't sure, all right, is he telling me he's part of this group? Is he warning me away? What is he up to?
Something that I forgot to mention during that scene is that he's not facing the screen. His desk is set up so that his back is to the screen, and that should have been more of a clue.
There's also the suggestion that even though he turned off the telescreen, something might still be recording him, so he wants to be very careful.
Like when you turn off your phone and the microphone is still on.
Yeah. When Alexa is secretly recording all your conversations and
then
laughing maniacally. Okay, what's everybody's recommendations if you enjoy this? What's another movie you might like?
I'm not sure it's if you enjoy this more than it is. These are two films that took a lot, sometimes egregiously took from this film and the book. And we've mentioned them, unfortunately, but I'm going to mention them again. V for Vendetta and Brazil.
V for Vendetta, especially in casting John Hurt as the bad guy.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's definitely a reaction, and it's acknowledging just how much it owes a great debt to 1984. The forms of torture in being broken down and rebuilt up into something new is all there.
The specific shot of the head being shaved is mirrored in that film.
Yes.
Yeah. Bob?
I still think Equilibrium is a good movie, Tim. I really do.
I'm not saying it's not a good movie. It's a lot of fun. I enjoyed the hell out of it.
I really do. I think of the many 1984 direct lifts, I think that's one of the better ones. You know, even if it is just 1984, but what if stick fighting, but also they had bullets in them? And, you know.
Oh, hey, Adrian's recommendation just for the not without incident scene.
Yeah. You know, I did have a thought while watching the film, though, that this, but if instead of a middle-aged man, if perhaps like a high school-aged or college-aged female who was perhaps plucky with a lot of self-esteem, and maybe not one but two young men who perhaps fought over her, very few flaws between them, but just enough.
So
that might be something that people would buy, perhaps one, possibly 4 volumes of. I just had a thought.
So
it just
Twilight.
might work.
It might. I just an idea.
So Twilight?
Just a concept.
Twilight.
A little bit.
It's basically Twilight.
Twilight, Hunger Games, Divergent.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hunger Games too.
And Divergent.
Yeah.
Okay. One I'd go with that the last third of the movie, the interrogation scenes, brings me in the mind of is this weird little movie called Closet Land with Madeleine Stowe and Alan Rickman, where she plays a children's writer who's being interrogated in this kind of unnamed, really harsh totalitarian government by Alan Rickman. The entire movie is set in this one interrogation room with the two of them going at it and him torturing her, gaslighting her, playing all sorts of horrific mind games, and sort of twisting her point of view as to whether she actually did something subversive or not. It kind of beats you over the head. It's not subtle at all, but it is definitely worth seeing, if only for the two performances. Rickman in particular is great. The other one I'd go with, I think, is The Lives of Others.
Oh, you are always so good at this.
Yeah,
in terms
forgot about
of
that one.
Oh, yeah.
that rigid sense of surveillance and control, and this guy who's a cog in the system who starts to kind of have his eyes opened.
Oh, that's the
to what
real
else it
one,
could
yeah.
be. Yeah.
Arguably also The Conversation.
Yep.
Ooh, oh, yeah.
Certainly in the paranoia and surveillance.
I always mean to prepare better for this part, and then I don't.
Hey, I didn't even have a favorite scene until I said what it was. So, Bob, do you have anything you'd like to plug on the show or that you can direct to listeners to?
Oh, gosh, yes. Well, you can follow me on Twitter at @the_Moviebob. I'm the weekly film critic at geek.com. You can find myself on YouTube and the Moviebob channel. I'm a weekly film writer at screenrant.com. My personal website is moviebopcentral.com. I have a Patreon at patreon.com/moviebob1. Yeah, I'm all over the place. I am everywhere, all over there.
Big Bob is watching.
Yes.
Okay, that ends our discussion, but not the conversation. If you'd like to have your say about 1984 or feel that we missed something, check out the comments section for this episode on cinemaspection.com and start talking. Email your comments, complaints, questions, and suggestions to cinemaspection@gmail.com. You can also like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter at cinemaspection or at @withsharpthings. Our show is available on iTunes and Stitcher, so if you like what you hear, please subscribe. If you have a moment to spare, please leave us a review as well. We appreciate your feedback, and your reviews increase our visibility. We'll be back to discuss another movie next time. Until then, thanks for listening, and remember to keep watching closely. There is more to a movie than what's on the screen.
Oh, man. I feel bad because I love William Hurt, but I would skip the movie and read the book.
You mean John Hurt?
God damn it.
Oh, because it's not just me.
Let me take that again.
How do you fuck that up?
Oh!
I have literally been waiting 10 whole minutes for one of you to do that again.
Because I'm tired.
No, please, thank you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to do it.
I know, I'm just going to let it lie.
Okay.
It's going to expose the fact that I can't tell one hurt from another.
Just got a whole lot of hurt.
I'm just hurting. Okay, so I'm sorry, John Hurt. I'm sorry, William Hurt. You are not the same person.
I'm sorry. I would never pour coffee in William Hurt. John Hurt, maybe.
No.